Hey guys, Dr. Hill here, and I'm sitting back reflecting after a day of practice and seeing patients, and I'm starting to ask myself, is the paleo diet responsible for the low cortisol levels that I'm seeing with patients? And I think I can make a pretty strong argument that it actually is, and better, I can provide a solution in how to stay paleo and not end up with low cortisol levels. Now, you may be asking yourself, what am I going to be dealing with if I have low cortisol levels? What kind of symptoms am I going to have? Well, there's quite a few different ones that can present, but the most common one is just simply fatigue. If your cortisol levels are low, you're going to notice fatigue. Typically how this is going to present over the course of a day is that you may wake up in the morning and feel tired, just may not have that get up and go that you might be used to when you wake. Your energy levels will tend to drop pretty readily after lunch. If you're an individual that feels that mid-afternoon slump in energy, that's an indication of having low cortisol levels. And waking up through the night, if you can't keep your glucose levels stable through the night because you don't have good cortisol, that could be an indication. But those aren't the only ones. There's other ones too. For example, if you're having brain fog, you just don't feel like you have good mental clarity, that can be an indication of having low cortisol levels. And cortisol is typically thought of as the stress hormone, and for good reasons, but one of the most common stressors, or one of the most significant stressors to our body, is low cortisol levels, and inherently is low glucose levels, excuse me. And inherently, one of the things that cortisol tries to predominantly do is keep our glucose levels up. It tries to keep our blood sugar levels at a steady state so that we always have an energy source to work with. So if we don't have that energy to work with because we don't have adequate glucose in the blood, or because there's not cortisol there to help pick that up, then we're going to see that you're just probably going to feel fatigued, and a lot of the symptoms of, say again, for example, brain fog or recovering after a workout are you're just not going to be as good at that. So there's a couple of things that we need to appreciate about this. And again, I want to keep this in the context of the paleo diet. So how does the paleo diet actually create low cortisol levels? The answer to that revolves around some misconceptions that I think are associated with the paleo diet. The first of which is that the paleo diet, and this can be stated a couple of different ways, is a low carbohydrate, high protein, high fat diet. The paleo diet is a low carbohydrate, high fat, high protein diet if you make it to be that way. It's not by design intended to be higher carbohydrate or higher protein, higher fat, lower carbohydrate. There are definitely ways to get carbohydrates into the diet that are avoiding grains, which we'll touch on in a minute. But what you have to appreciate about this is that if the majority of your diet is coming from protein or fat, and you're looking at the glucose that's in our blood as being our primary source of energy, carbohydrates give us that glucose. Now, I know there's going to be some arguments that, well, yes, we can work off of a high-fat diet, we can burn ketones. Yes, I realize that. However, that is not the optimal state for most people. And when that does happen, we're going to be trying to over-secrete cortisol. And if that cortisol is tried to secrete for too long a period of time, the glands just begin to run out of the precursors to continue to support that, one of which is a key nutrient that I'm going to discuss at the end of this video. So with that said, the paleo diet should really be remodified, and it comes down to the fact that, again, if you're pigeonholing the paleo diet as a low carbohydrate, then I'm going to label you as probably what I would call a carbohydrophobe. And a carbohydrophobe is someone who's just phobic of carbohydrates. It's just as simple as it sounds. In our society, we have become so indoctrinated that carbohydrates are bad. That's not true. Carbohydrates are necessary. They're the preferred energy source for our body. And what's probably more misleading about this is making the assumption that all carbohydrates are the same. That's not true either. There are definitely different effects from carbohydrates. So if we're sourcing our carbohydrates from, say, for example, starchy vegetables, that's going to have a much different physiological effect as opposed to sourcing those carbohydrates from grains, which I don't advocate. Now, with that said, what's the solution here? Well, the solution is multifold on this. So first, and this is a must, is we want to start with the diet. If you're really serious about fixing low cortisol levels, you have to get your body out of a hypoglycemic state. And again, if you have low cortisol levels, the likelihood that you're hypoglycemic is extremely high. So again, we want to start with these starchy vegetables. If you're not familiar with what starchy vegetables are, it's far more than just a potato. And you'll actually find a link on my homepage that under the paleo food list that'll give you an expansive list of starchy vegetables that you can pull from that are going to be great adjuncts to your diet. So in just a couple of, just to give them off the top of my head, are going to be things like, of course, sweet potatoes, most people know, but you'll have sweet potatoes, you'll have your large squash like your butternut, your acorn, your spaghetti squash, you'll have your turnips, your rutabagas, beets, parsnips, carrots. These are all things that are going to have good glucose forming properties and that our body is going to use to increase our serum glucose, and that's what's going to help get our low cortisol levels back up to where they need to be so that you can feel better. Now, when we talk about carbohydrates, it's very easy to want to pull fruits in as the carbohydrate source. Fruits aren't going to be a workable option here, and the reason that they are not is because fruits are going to be fructose forming. Fructose does not directly influence serum glucose. We need things that are going to influence serum glucose, so blood glucose levels. So that means that we have to pull from starchy vegetables. Now, I said earlier in the video that I would mention a nutrient that was important in this process, and when it comes to addressing low cortisol levels, there are a couple of nutrients that we can consider: B5, vitamin C, serine. These are all common nutrients that are typically labeled as beneficial to the adrenal glands. However, the one that stands probably head and shoulders above the rest of these on this list is going to be B5. B5 is this little forgotten nutrient that doesn't have anything flashy about it, but it's extremely important. And the reason that it is that B5 is the precursor to all of your steroid hormones. So if we're looking to address low cortisol levels, B5 is ultimately the precursor to cortisol. However, not only is it the precursor to cortisol, it's also the precursor to other hormones such as testosterone, DHEA, progesterone, estrogen. These are all originally derived from B5. So when it comes to really fixing this, there's two components that must be considered. One is you have to make sure you're consuming adequate amounts of the right kinds of food, getting those starchy vegetables in, not being a carbohydrophobe. You have to get away from being scared of carbohydrates. Your body needs carbohydrates. Just as a point on that, anywhere from 25 to 33% of your body's total carbohydrate intake on a daily basis goes to your brain. You have to fuel your brain. If you want good mental function, you've got to eat good quality carbohydrates. And then the other thing that you have to do here too is make sure that you're utilizing nutrients such as B5. B5 is extremely important, and bar none in my practice, it's one of the most common deficiencies that I see, and very, very consistently is it linked to low cortisol levels. So guys, there's a solution pattern for you. If you're having some of the symptoms I mentioned, the fatigue, the brain fog, you're just not feeling as energetic, the mid-afternoon slumps, waking up tired, waking up through the night, those are all indications for low cortisol, and you need to take action on this immediately. I appreciate your time. I'm Dr. Arland Hill.